Let's talk about controlling sessions. Now I have a few files open here. We'll talk about them. But I do want to open up the login system and talk about that generally now. We'll talk about that in great detail just to introduce it. Now we'll ignore the top part up here. This is going to make sure that the page isn't going to be cached. That's important when you're dealing with session information, for example. You don't want to think that the user might be logged in when they're not necessarily logged in, things like that. I always have my expiration cache up here in the form of the headers, and you can actually just use the same thing or something similar. And I'll talk about that in a different video. But for the most part, you're always going to use that session start, as I have mentioned when you're dealing with the session. You have to. But sometimes when you actually have a login page or you're actually in a user system, I'll explain that in detail like I said. But when you're on a login page here, you don't want the user to have to come back to this page if they're already logged in. You might want to go to another page, their account page, etc. And what you need to do is manage the session. Manage and manipulate the session, and that's really what you're up to. So the first thing that I like to do is actually require certain session variables to be in there if there is a session variable that's not set there. I have initialization routines that I use, and that's going to be in the include folder. Notice that the dot is going to go back up to the main root there, and then into the include. That's going to go backwards in the path, and then we have this file session init PHP, and we can grab that. And if that session variable wasn't set, then we want to actually include this file. We use this script when we set up the different forms and the different MySQL database sections and things like that. So you might see a slightly different version of this. But for the most part, we do explain everything here. This sets up all these session variables. And then at the last, we set this session variable, means that the session has been initialized. We're not concerned if the user's logged in at this point. We just want to see that the session has been initialized, that this file has been set. You want to check out the include file videos for more information on how to use the include files if you're skipping around. But these variables are going to get set. And now we're managing the session because we are checking to see if the session was actually not just started, but if there's a variable there that we control that's going to be working for us now. You can also echo that out if you want to, another variable to see if logged in is going to be true. And this is when you're going to actually check session logged in to see about going to the page where the account's going to start. So if you are logged in on this login page, then it's going to redirect, do a page redirect and go to another page, and that's going to be the account.php file. We don't have to even see this file here, which is great. And then otherwise we would deal with other form processing. So that would do a redirect. And that's managing the session. You can also note that you're going to be dealing with underscore session as that global array that you can work with. And there are other ways to do that with register session vars. This is another way that we can actually set those session variables. Instead of doing it this way with this underscore session in the array type way, you can do it this way. You can alternate. You want to look at the documentation. I normally use this version, the underscore session. But you can do it this way as well. Session register function, and then you can see the session variables. And then you can actually use them like this. But this gets a little confusing, and it can be troublesome, and it could be a pretty much a security hazard there at some point. But you're going to register them and then just use them like regular variables. So that could get confusing. I prefer to use the session, the underscore session array type. And then I always have to use that. I can't use it this way, but that's better for me. And then you can see that there are other functions, and we'll take a look at those as well. But that's managing the session for the most part. We'll look at the reading and the writing of these particular session variables and how to destroy this as well as we move forward.